Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Again, it's before lunch, so if I get finished in 5 minutes, I assume we'll be very, very happy. I'm not going to do that, though. So I'm the CTO at eBECS. We're a part of DXC, essentially the Microsoft practice at DXC. I've been with eBECS for about 4 years. Before then, I spent about 10 years at Microsoft, all on the engineering side. I worked on the first SaaS offerings from Microsoft, which was CRM Online. I was on the architects for that service. I worked on Azure, Office, a bunch of other really geeky and boring stuff. My job now, luckily, is not to focus on those things, but really to work with people like yourselves and have that conversation around how do I bring your digital strategy to your technology strategy, how do you bridge them together, what do work streams look like, how do I handle disruption. And obviously, digital disruption is quite funny, actually. I hate the word digital because I think it means absolutely nothing. You know, it's just sort of digital anything. But disruption is important. Disruption is key. So every industry is being disrupted, and what I want to talk about today wasn't necessarily disruption is good or bad, because obviously if you're a customer, it's good. If business is, it's challenging. I want to talk about the way you approach disruption and the way you orient your organization to think about disruption, whether it's an opportunity, whether it's a risk, and how you manage that moving forward. A bit about us. So we are a big systems services company, $24 billion. This slide shows you two things. One, we have lots of very, very big numbers, which is pretty cool. Also, we love black and white. So all our slides are extremely black and white. I have deviated a little bit towards the end, which I will, I'm sure, get spanked for when I get back. But really, you know, quite a large company, 6,000 clients, global organization, 150K employees. A lot of what we do is around helping customers sort of reinvent themselves from a technology perspective, from a business perspective. So if you think of the key business lines we have cloud application, analytics, workplace, security. I've kind of popped them all up together because one of the key things of digital disruption is that companies who are successful aren't looking within silos. So you rarely have the conversation if someone says, I'd like to digitize my BI platform because that's going to be a winner, right? Very often the conversation is from the perspective of the end customer and the service you provide a customer. And when you think from that perspective, you end up looking across the breadth of applications and services. And as IT leaders, we become essentially providers of those offerings and services. So I've put these up just to talk about the areas we have strength in. But really the way to think about them is that we rarely ever do a project in isolation, other than maybe workplace and mobility, which is a specific area. Very often the problem is a particular business problem, and we'll pick aspects from each of these areas to solve the specific business problem. Make sense so far? I tend to speak really fast. If I'm speaking fast, throw something at me. If you're mean, I'll throw this thing at you. It's enormous. It's the world's largest clicker. It's the size of a 1984 mouse. So we'll do that. And also, I can run home from here. I live half a mile from here, so I have no issue getting out of here. So let's talk about what our customers are saying. So, you know, my favorite line is always, I'll meet a CIO, MD, you know, CTO, and they'll say, I need to transform. I want to transform, right? It's kind of important. It's my top priority for the year. I'm going to transform. Great. Why? Well, because everyone's transforming, so I need to transform. So very often, it's the way you approach the problem which is interesting. And you can get sucked into the hype curve, right? So a few years ago, it was IoT, right? Everyone wanted to do an IoT project. Now it's, you know, last year was ML, or now it's intelligence, right? That's not the point. You can, if you just think that you need to transform, you need to innovate, you can get sucked in really, really easily, right? So before you get to the point where you say, I need to transform my business, there's a process you have to follow, and we'll talk about that. Needing to change fast, it's something which is very, very tactical, and we can talk about what that actually means. What does it mean to change fast? How do you monitor that as well? And really, the focus of today's session is the last one, which is, as IT leaders, how do we help our business innovate? Like, what is our role, right? Our role is not to keep the lights on anymore. We know that. Everyone understands that here, right? So what is our role? In the world of disruption, where a technology-based organization can come in and disrupt the businesses which we take care of, how does our role evolve? And how do we communicate our role to our stakeholders, to our business counterparts? And that's really what today is about. The answer is quite simple here, but it's something to worth thinking about, right? So when you look at disruption in your organization, is it something you say, well, it's going to get disrupted, I should do the best I can? Or do you say, great, finally someone's disrupting my industry. Now I can actually do something interesting with it. So think about that for your organization. Take a second. And how do you look at this problem? I did a lot of work in my life, my previous life, my sins, at IBM and Microsoft, where we worked with fairly large organizations. And I think the way they handled this problem was a clear indicator of where they would end up. So some organizations would say, we're getting disrupted, so let's shore up our assets the best we can. Let's squeeze out as much as we can from what we have and expect that something's going to happen. Or we'll protect ourselves by building walls around the organization so no one can get in, essentially establishing a mini monopoly of states, right? Which is fine. It's a viable business approach. It doesn't get you any fans. It doesn't make your customers any happier. Right? Now, very often people think of disruption and they say, great, there's this disruption in the market, I must innovate. Let me get some R&D funding ready and throw some money at the problem. Again, one of my favorite things to look at is the goal is not to innovate. If someone says the goal is to innovate, they're basically wrong. The goal of no organization is innovate. No one's ever said, you know what, I love Google because they innovate. No, you love Google because the maps work, right? You love Google because of, whatever reason there is, right? You love the devices, whatever not. You don't love them because they innovate. Innovation is not actually a thing. But very often, if you get caught up in that and you see everyone's innovating, I must innovate as well, you lose track. And the simple fact is, unless you're driving additional value for your customers, which is, and here's the point, perceivable by your customers, is useless. So when you think of innovation, when you think of handling disruption, think about what additional value is this innovation going to drive? Is it perceivable by my customers or not? And your customer could be a business stakeholder in that sense, right? Do not innovate because you think you have to. You will end up wasting a lot of money. When I was at Microsoft, we were working with a third-party ISV, basically, who ended up putting in a massive amount of money to build a custom solution for a problem which didn't exist, basically. It was an incredible solution. You could see it now. You'd be like, this is fantastic. I just don't know what problem it solves. But it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. We win every award, right? So be very, very careful that your response to disruption isn't innovation for the sake of innovation. So what is the response? Right. Excellent. So there's two approaches here, right? One is you can overcome it, which is it's being disrupted. Let me see what I can do to overcome it. Let me create barriers, create new different models, the business models, just prevent it from really happening, right? As opposed to encouraging it and saying, great. Because very often we're constrained by industries, right? We're constrained by the people we work with, the organizations we have, the customers we have, and their expectations of a service. So I'll give you a really small example, but I think it's a nice example. In northern France, they have a lot of restaurants and cafes and chalets where the only way of getting gas up there is by delivering gas canisters, basically, right? You get 2 canisters, one is finished, you plug the other one in, and that's it. Very simple business model. It's been working that way for forever, and the business model is that every week someone comes by, checks your gas canister. If it's empty, they'll give you a new one. Simple business model, right? A couple of guys, literally a couple of guys, decided, you know what? We'll put a device on it so we know when you switch over. Fairly simple. So you'll say, great, that's smart. So all you've done is that you have information now, and now you can be efficient in when you visit them. Actually, no. That's not the problem they solved. Because the customer's problem wasn't how often do you visit me. The problem was I never run out of gas. So they said, our proposition to you now is that you will never run out of gas. That's it. So that's the case where you say extremely traditional industry, extremely traditional. And they just said, look, if we really think about it, we want to encourage the behavior where customers says, actually, I'm not paying for a weekly gas drop-off. I'm paying for gas. How do I get that? So a great example of that. My favorite comment, and I've heard a few times, someone says, I'm going to disrupt disruption. Like, well, that's brilliant, right? It's quite cute as well. Why not take that effort and disrupt the competition or disrupt your industry, disrupt the business? If you're going to put the effort into disrupting something, don't disrupt something which is actually causing you to make the effort. So it's kind of cyclical there. Protecting yourself, I sort of covered that off already, as opposed to becoming a disruptor. avoiding disruption in our industries. And this is an interesting one, particularly if you look at something like financial services, where it's a fairly traditional business, and there's a lot of money involved. Obviously, there's a lot of legacy involved as well. I did a lot of work with Metro Bank when they initially launched their service, and they're the first bank to go on the Microsoft's cloud, the 100% cloud-based bank as well. And we had a lot of conversations with other banks around. How do we respond to Metro Bank, right? They're disrupting our industry. What do we do there, right? But Metro Bank didn't decide to get in the business so they could go online, right? They want to get in the business so they can provide a different customer experience to their customers. So very often, when you respond, when you try to avoid disruption in industry, you're forgetting why disruption is actually happening. If you look at Airbnb, right? I've used, because I'm massively old, I've used stuff like VRBO and Home Away and things like that for ages. They do basically the same thing with, it's a lot less interest, do the same thing, right? But why is Airbnb popular? So I think it's good to think about that. So really, how can we be agents of disruption? How do we encourage it? How do we disrupt competition? And how do we force disruption in industry? So how do we actually do that? This is a very simplistic view, but I'll kind of walk through it, right? The first thing, and this is a view from really IT leaders, right? As IT leaders, how do we embrace this? First thing you do is we have to make sure that as an organization, a broader organization, we are constantly evaluating where we are and our vulnerabilities. Like, where are we exposed? And we do it within eBECS as well, within DXC as well. We look at our competition and say, okay, great, based on the offerings we have, based on where we make our business, where are we exposed as a business? Then again, looking at other business models. Now, specifically, our role in that conversation is to come up and say, from a technology perspective, here's what we should be looking at. Because if you think about it, if you are a CEO, MD, whatever not, you're hearing blockchain, IoT, machine learning, BI analytics, cubes, lakes. You don't know what that means. And if you do know what that means, it's not really your job to know what that means. So we are the people who have to go to them and say, actually, based on our vulnerabilities, based on the other business models coming in, and based on our business, here are the set of technologies which actually make sense. So now what? Great, I have a set of technologies, I have an idea, I have a spark, right? Then you have to create an organization where you can experiment. You can bring new models, bring new tools, and the key one here is we've done this before, right? We've done innovation labs, R&D budgets, and research labs. But what I'm actually proposing is slightly different, which is we need to empower the business themselves to do this. And the reason we don't do this now is because we're kind of worried about what happens to the application. So if any of you remembers Access and the explosion of apps there, we don't want to manage that, right? Because that was a bit of a mess. So we want to have a more managed, a more secure, a more controlled environment. And I'll give you one example of that, but there's many other ways of doing that, right? Now, when you are doing this, it's a great opportunity for you to break down silos, right? Within your organizations, from a data perspective, an application perspective, and others as well, because you're saying we're just experimenting. We're asking the question, if we had a bit more information, if wishes were fishes, what could we do? And we're putting people who understand the business in charge of that, not IT. So it's not someone saying, I wish I could do this, IT go build it for me. And we'll dive into that in more detail. The last one we all know about, right? Yes? You have to fail fast to innovate faster. Now, failing fast doesn't mean you throw 65 ideas in the air and say, I hope one of them lands. That's just irresponsible, more or less. Right? Failing fast really is having a strategy around the ideas and iterating the ideas until you eventually get to the set of ideas you actually care about. Right? Unless you have unlimited budgets, in which case I'd like to work for you. But in case you don't, you have to think of it that way. How do we fail fast? How do we learn? How do we innovate even faster to out-innovate our competition? Questions so far? I've been speaking for a while. Great. So when I think about where to start in this scenario, right? So you want to start, you have an idea, you have an inkling. The first space we can look at is the data itself. So most applications in your organization, really most applications across the board are fairly siloed because they were designed in a classic 3-tier architecture, and that's just the way they are. They control, manage their own data, they care about it, everything else is irrelevant, right? So most app platforms are the same, they only see their business data. But most processes in your organizations are far more connected. So you have a mishmash of data, and processes through the organization. And as you start to innovate, the first thing you usually see, which is why I said it's not IT-led, you usually see is two things. One is you don't have access to the data. No one's going to give it to you, right? That's one problem. The other problem is, even if you had access to the data, how would you put it together? Where would you put it together? What does it actually mean? Yeah. So this is, and what it prevents you from doing is having, what is essentially called as a digital feedback loop. It's a pretty diagram, I think, because we only allow 3 colors. But essentially what it is that you have key parties in your organization. You have customers, employees, operations, and products. Each of those generate data, right? Generate some signals, some data, which has to be, let's assume you can feed in somewhere. When you have that data, you can generate insight from that data. Now this part we're kind of good at, right? You build a warehouse, you can do some smarter stuff there as well, collect some data. What we're not very good at is what happens after that. How do we take that data and feed it back in the business process? Because it's not actually useful unless it's actually making a change, which is why the loop is really important. Now, this concept applies to basically anything, right? Everything now, particularly now, is generating data and signals, whether it's your customer social media or your products. It makes no difference what it actually is. So all these signals are being generated. How do you capture them? How do you synthesize them? And how do you feed them back so the loop gets maintained further? Make sense? Now, Microsoft's proposition on this is where we're going to slightly techie part of this, is what Microsoft has done is quite subtly have built a, I can't see it really. Anyways, have built a essentially a common data platform if you look at the bottom, right? So the common data platform essentially is a common data model published on GitHub and a database on top of that. And that platform powers productivity, so the classic Office, Power BI, Yammer, Project, Skype, SharePoint stuff. It powers Dynamics 365, for those who are familiar with that, which is your classic CRM and ERP, HRM. It's all on the same exact platform. Any third-party apps you can build on that as well. But for today's session, I'm focusing on purpose-built apps, which are really custom apps. You build in something called Power Apps, which is essentially a low-code app builder experience. And you can use Flow for the integration side as well. But the key point here is this. The data platform in the previous diagram, the middle of the propeller, so to speak, is that common data service here. Because there's recognition in the business that we can have the best sales application in the world, but it makes no difference if it can't speak our ERP, or if it can't talk to the customer via the portal, or if it can't talk to our products directly. It makes no difference. So the first thing we have to do is you have to come to a common data understanding. Now, in the next few slides, we'll talk about how you do that for yourselves. Like, this is great for Microsoft. Hooray, congratulations. Massive R&D budget. But what are you supposed to do? And this is where that thing expands into what I call the innovation platform, right? And I'll start from the bottom left. This is the weakest laser of all time. Anyways, bottom left, which is the common data service. The common data service, very simply, is a database running a data model, which is published on GitHub, which has classic business entities across CRM, ERP, HRM, classic workloads, right? Account, contact, blah, blah, blah. If you go look up CDM in GitHub, you'll find it. It's a pre-built database. You can obviously add stuff to it. Your business will map almost directly to it as well, right? Now, we'll talk about why that's important, right? So essentially, if you have, and to put data in, there are both connectors and gateways. Gateways allow you to reach into on-premises and get live data or sync it, and connectors do, well, they connect fairly obviously, right? Is there as well. So that's the way for you to get data either into CDS or through CDS to surface your applications. Now, I'll stop here for a second because we've done something really interesting here, right? We, instead of going to our business and saying, here's the data, go figure out what you want to do, or here's some process and application, we've said, actually, no. We, as an IT organization, will provide you an innovation platform. An innovation platform is managed by us, is governed by us. We give access, we revoke access, we make sure it's running well, performance, all of that is covered by us, right? So you can't sort of go off piece and do whatever you want to do, but we will provide that framework for you. Now, once you have that, you've started exposing data across the organization. You've broken those silos, really. And the first thing which usually happens is this. Someone looks in Power BI or Tableau or whatever not, and they'll say, wow, that's incredible. We have all this data, It's usually two reactions. One reaction is, we have all this data, and this data isn't quite right. Someone has to go fix it now. But usually, there's a lot of value in just the first step, right? Which I think some of us have already done, which is let's get ourselves into a consistent model. Let's start building some BI on the model. Now, but that's not innovation, really. That's just reporting and analytics, right? So what about now? So what about a sales leader or a customer service leader who's looking at this and saying, yeah, but that's great, but I have these business processes, account management, which I think differentiate us from our competition. Or the way we do recruiting is quite unique for our organization. How do we automate that, right? And that's where Power Apps and Flow come into play. Now, Power Apps is basically a way for you to kind of do a drag and drop app building, no code, low code experience, right? It's aimed at business analysts, right? So when we do these Power Apps, we typically have a business stakeholder sit with us. They'll co-build the app with us. You can collect data from multiple sources. You can build your apps within Power Apps itself. This is the actual model, the platform which Microsoft Dynamics and Office use as well. So it's not like it's a sort of something just to play with, right? It's a serious platform. But the important thing here is the ownership. The ownership of these applications and this innovation sits with the business stakeholders, not with you. And that's something you have to kind of think about as well, right? You're enabling them, you're providing some guidance, and you're saying, here are the assets of the organization, here's some functionality we can expose, and we'll help you through the process, but now you tell us, where do you think we can innovate, right? I'm providing you this nice, shiny platform. What do you think we should do? So instead of the old problem, which is, I want to do all these cool things, but IT is not letting me because of A, B, and C, you're saying, actually, here you go. Here's some tools. What do you want to do? What areas do you want to invest in? And the areas can be almost anything, right? So we have some customers using it for conservation management. We have internally, we use it for HR. We use it for essentially anything. Anywhere where we believe that we are unique in any way, and we want the business to own that uniqueness, we do. Okay? Now, the next question. Great, so that's a great example. But what do I actually do? Where do I start? How do I look at my business, and where do I direct them to? Like, what kind of ideas, what kind of support do I give them around? So I really like this view because it really simplifies what we all do, really. It's customers, our people, and the products and services we create, and that's basically it. Around the fans, there's a bunch of potential workloads around design, planning, manufacturing, around people management, inspiring them, onboarding them, hiring them, around classic sales, service, field service, project service, right? But the reason I put this up there is not to sort of impress you about how much text we can get into one slide. It's more to talk about when you take the proposition to your stakeholders, before they say, I have a great idea, right? Say, great, let's think about what impact this idea will have on our customers, people, and products. It's really usually only a great idea if it connects those three in some way, like a really great idea. It could be a good idea. It could be a half-decent idea. Right? It could be, we'd like to hire people faster. It's a good idea. Let's do that, right? But a great idea is something which connects everything. So think about that. And also, the way you connect everything through this shared data model is going to provide you a lot of insight and a lot of leverage. Right? So think a lot about and this is where the disruption part of innovation comes in, because most organizations running in silos who don't have any party looking at the broader problem will tend to innovate within that silo itself. I used to work with a customer in Germany who had spent 2.5 years building out the perfect sales process. I mean, it was incredible. The visuals and demonstrations and animations, and it was very pretty. Like, it was really nice. There was a lot of effort put into it, and they had spent God knows how many thousand man-hours on it, right? And I'm sure it is probably the greatest sales process in their industry. Right? But funnily enough, customers aren't buying sales processes. They're buying products. Right? And they kind of got lost in that whole sort of rabbit hole where they said, no, let's nail the sales process, make it as efficient as possible. Let's minimize waste. Let's make sure everyone's fully connected. But they kind of forgot that there are people buying from you, and there are things you're actually selling. And how do those come together? If your sales process is running at 200 miles an hour, and your products take how long your product takes, then that's the way it is. If your customers aren't used to working at that pace, then that's the way it is. So you have to bring them along with you. So when you're having these discussions, this is also a great way to think about, am I bringing everyone along with me, or am I running off in my own direction? Very often when we have these discussions, then we'll go to a customer and they'll say, oh, so-and-so is driving my innovation agenda. I have no idea what they're doing. It's quite a common complaint you get, right? And usually it's because they've gotten excited, they found something they think is really, really cool, and they've dove into it without figuring out broader impact on the organization, right? So going back to the earlier point, we're not here to innovate, right? That's not our job. Our job is to figure out what can I do, what can I offer my business to let them innovate. And that's where our role really changes. Questions? Just hungry, basically, I assume. Same here, I'm starving too.
I actually have one question. So it's more around, and I agree with you in terms of, customers aren't buying innovation, and it's important to take a step back and think about what it is you're trying to deliver. I think where a lot of, let's say, traditional organisations get stuck, at least is what I've seen in other experiences, is that by the time we've done that, we feel the landscape has moved on again. And so the temptation is there, well, let's find something and innovate, because we reckon we can do that, and we spin it up in some sort of pseudo-skunkworksy kind of way, and away you go, and at least you get something. Whereas otherwise what we do is we enter into this enterprise strategic planning cycle that 3 years later emerges with some new business model that is now completely redundant based upon everything that's changed. And that's probably overstating it, but you know what I'm sort of getting at. So I just wondered your perspective in terms of your engagement with organisations, and how do you, for us bigger, perhaps slower moving type organisations, how do we get around that?
I like challenging it by saying that if you're running a customer-centric project which takes more than 2 years, it's already failed, basically. Because by then, the majority of their requirements have expired and the expectations have changed. And it's a hard message for organizations to look at it that way. It's a hard message even for us to think of it that way as well, because in the enterprise, that's how we think of spend, right? You allocate budget for the next 3 years. You say, once I deliver this thing in 3 years, I'll have this, right? I think if that's the approach you maintain, you will always be disappointed, unfortunately. Disappointed. I think the approach has to be about continual improvement and continual revisiting of what that actually means to your business. If you don't do that, then you're going to be in the same boat where, I used to joke about CRM, because CRM is a funny area, and it's quite cyclical, where people would buy a particular CRM system, let's say it was Siebel, ran it for 5 years, and they said, well, that was terrible, right? I haven't touched it in 5 years, and it's surprisingly not great. Let me buy some Salesforce, ran it for 5 years, that's terrible too. Dynamics, 5 years, terrible too, right? The problem is the system was fine. The system was the way it was to start off, right? But because you have changed, but you haven't kept up. And I think previously, for large organizations, we didn't really change that much. Our expectations were fairly standard, right? We went to a bank and we requested an account, and we figured, in a couple of weeks, why not, right? It'll show up. Someone asked us to fill. I bought a house a couple of years ago in the States, and I had to sign 345 pages, and that seemed about right to me, right? That's my expectation. If I tell a millennial, like, what do you mean sign? Like, what's a sign? Why would I sign something, right? What does it mean, really? So I think we sort of have to look at things differently. From a larger organization, I think the other factor here is larger organizations, instead of trying to innovate the same way as disruptors, need to innovate in a different way. Need to innovate in a way where they can leverage the assets they have about their customers, about their products, about their industry, about their connections, and build on that. Right? Because you're not going to out-innovate them, because you have legacy to carry. So how do you convert the legacy into something which is valuable? Just a couple more slides, really. One is, we've talked about a sort of very small part of sort of how disruption is affecting us, but really, it is a paradigm shift. I think we all generally get that. It's impacting on all sectors. It is beyond IT, which is why the people we have in the room now are probably different people we had in the room 10 years ago. We talked about CIOs. The role is really evolved. It really has. It's not about keeping the lights on or making sure budgets are where they need to be. It's really, the successful ones are innovation partners, or innovation enablers, right? The ones where you talk about, we've fundamentally changed the business model, and our IT helped us do that, are the successful organizations there as well. Now, it is excellence at different levels and different dimensions, and this is where It's a more holistic view of the business. So the key challenge really for most people I talk to is, how do I change the conversation about A, the services I provide to my organization, right? B, how I present them back to the broader business. It's not just services, it's what platform do I provide. And C, there is a lot of conversation around emerging technologies, and it's kind of scary, and it's kind of confusing. It's difficult to keep up to. And if I can't keep up, it's harder for someone whose focus is to make sure that sales are done to keep up, right? So how do we bridge that gap? What do we actually do to make sure that we make their lives a little bit simpler, and we provide them a bit of guidance around, don't just innovate for no reason. Here, we will guide you through this process. Here is our technology which makes sense. Yes?
Just a question on an organisation that's grown up on capital projects. As you move into this world, it's very much about expense projects and software as a service. What advice have you got to kind of pivot an organisation into that new thinking? So already we spent the last however many years talking about digital transformation, getting people into this place. We're now having to fund it in a very, very different way.
Yeah.
At a time when expense dollars or euros or wherever you sit are being squeezed, the likes of TNT coming in to cut the costs of industries.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question. And I think even for us as an organization, we've gone through a similar transformation to an extent as well. One of the key things there was two key factors. One is if your business is based on the price of essentially the ability to charge for people, the fact that technology is taking away a lot of the barriers is going to hit you, and that's just a fact, right? So that's key. The other factor is that as customers get more comfortable with consuming services, and as architecture as a whole is moving towards this loosely connected best-of-breed application architecture, there's less of a appetite to consume these monolithic projects. There is, however, more of an appetite to consume a constrained business value-driven offer. So the advice I give is, try and pivot all the services you have around offers, and fixed price or whatever, however you want to structure it, right? But the key factor there is when you have that a fixed price kind of offering or offer, then you can think about, as an organization, how can I either deliver it more efficiently or provide more value? So you're essentially changing the conversation from people to value, which is a key part of the message today, right? If you're able to do that, then you're able to provide. So the example everyone always gives is, when you're getting a builder in your house to build a kitchen, and they give you a quote, right? You go through it line by line, you go into the details, how much is the wood, this paneling. I clearly do not do any handiwork. But when you buy a car, you just buy a car, right? You don't worry about how much does it cost Mercedes, where the nuts and bolts come from, tires come, you don't care. Because the car has value for you. The builder doesn't, right? The kitchen does, but the builder's time doesn't. So you'll actually go through it line by line. So think of it that way. If we're selling cars, and we had to put a value on what we're actually offering, what would that look like?
That leads me on to another debate. Apologies for taking their time, but value tracking, because IT is very much an enabler of,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're happen to be in a marketplace where trying to grow top line is very difficult, and the minute you do grow top line, it's got 1,000 fathers of success. How do you split up the value from I totally get your point. As we're enabling value, how do you attribute?
I'm almost done, but let's catch up afterwards. Yeah, perfect. This was my colorful slide. I hope you're all very impressed. Although I showed it to my daughter, and she's like, "What's a pencil?" So there was that. She's 3 years old. So this will only last another couple of years. So key 3 takeaways. One is, you have to bring disruption to the table. It's your responsibility. Don't hide. Don't wait for someone to tell you that you're being disrupted. Just say, we should be doing this. We should be pushing the boundaries. Our competitors are doing this, but really we should be encouraging it because we think there is a way for us to have a more valuable offering to our customers. Innovation platform, I've given you an example of Microsoft Innovation Platform. If you want to know more, come talk to me afterwards. But really, there are tons of these platforms out there, right? Just make sure you have something in place to enable your business. And lastly, customer, people, products. That's what we actually fundamentally do, right? Customer, people, products. Anything you're innovating on, make sure you appreciate the impact on each of those 3. That's all I have. Questions? My guys?